All right, everybody, ding, ding, ding. That's what I'm talking about. We are back at it again. This is Ringside Presents Corner Confessions. And as always, I am here. Y'all know what it is. My name is Troy Vaughn, also known as Trey Amazing. Favorite part-time stripper, part-time megachurch pastor, but full-time dating commentator. And I am here with someone very special, someone who her reputation precedes her. We have Miss Kwajelyn Jackson, who is the executive director of the Feminist Women's Health Center right here in Atlanta, Georgia, everybody. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you for the invitation.
Indeed, that's what I'm talking about. And again, digging the t-shirt. T-shirt is right on time.
Thank you.
So this is, well, I have you here because I really want to cut into a very controversial topic, okay? But before we dive into the interview, kind of give just a brief intro of, your role at the Feminist Women's Health Center and kind of just a brief background.
Sure. So yes, I'm Kwajelyn Jackson. I'm the executive director at Feminist Women's Health Center. We are a reproductive health rights and justice organization that provides direct health services out of the clinic, but also does community organizing, movement building, civic engagement, public policy, leadership development, and sexual and reproductive education in the community. We've been in Atlanta since 1976, and I have been executive director since 2018, and I'm the first Black executive director in the organization's history.
Nice. I like that. Big time. Okay, so this topic, when you type in feminism in Atlanta, your center came up like pretty much at the very top. So really, again, I'm very appreciative that you allowed me to interview you because this topic can be somewhat divisive, especially on social media. Anybody who's in the realm of, relationships and dating, dating discussions, things like that, when the word feminism comes up, it can be a loaded word. A lot of emotions are tied to that word, good and bad. So from your history, from what you know, and, I'm sure you heard all sides, kind of give, for the people out there, for the subscribers, what in your definition, what is feminism? Or what, kind of give your best approximation of exactly what, if you had described what feminism is, how would you describe it?
So feminism for me is a reaction to patriarchy. So you cannot really define feminism without first addressing the system of patriarchy and the ways that is connected to all of the oppressive systems that we find ourselves in. So patriarchy assigns hierarchical value to gender. It makes the decision to center maleness and masculinity, those traits, those behaviors, the posture in decision making. And it shows up in things like pay and in gender roles. So all of those things are affecting the ways that we see sex and gender across society. It can differ across culture, it can differ across different societal norms, but patriarchy has existed for thousands and thousands of years. Feminism is a reaction to that. Feminism says that actually we need to be looking at the sexes as equal, and we need to rebalance the value system that we've assigned to masculinity or femininity. So feminism seeks to try to create a balanced and equal system that allows for a spectrum of ways that people can show up in their gender expression.
I like that. For a lot of people, I'm not sure the history or when feminism first started or whatever, but you do have a lot of people, even in 2022, that still hold very misogynistic, very chauvinistic beliefs. I promise you, even the Gen X and even the Gen Zs and millennials, a lot of them still feel like, well, this is a man's role and this is a woman's role.
Oh, I'm very familiar.
Yes, but it is so. This mindset is alive, well, and on steroids because I'm in the genre of relationships and dating and, these debates and discussions on a regular basis. And you still have a lot of people in dating that feels like, no, as a man, you're supposed to work and the woman stays home. The woman is supposed to clean the home and take care of the kids and, be there sexually for her husband 24/7, things like that. And these are real mindsets that are not only a lot of men, but even some women. A lot of women still hold, these beliefs. So so when did, was this like, did it start in a particular year or by a particular person, or how did this movement or this wave of feminism, how did it first start?
There have been multiple waves of feminism, and sometimes the specific language of like academic white feminism might be confined to first wave thinking about the suffrage movement, the fight for the right to vote for women. Second wave feminism is often associated with the 60s and 70s and women's liberation, birth control, abortion. But feminist uprising has again been happening for millennia. It's been happening since the dawn of time. There are certainly ways that people have bucked up against this idea of should. This idea that there's only one way that masculinity can show up in the world. There's only one way that femininity can show up in the world. There's a way that women are supposed to be. And what feminism and more specifically Black feminism seeks to say is there's multiple right ways of being. And that if we make space for and value those distinct differences and don't assign hierarchy, value, or punish those behaviors that deviate from the norm that we have been socialized under, that's when we have actual equity. That's when we are able to have a free and just society where people can be their full authentic selves without having to face consequences for being who they actually are.
Now, you mentioned Black feminism. How does that distinguish between, what is white feminism versus Black feminism?
So Black feminism seeks to look at these things intersectionally. So it takes into account the ways that race, sexuality and sexual orientation, income, all of these different systems of oppression compound and complicate the ways that sexism shows up in our lives. There's a phrase that was coined by Moya Bailey, who's one of my classmates from Spelman College, called misogynoir, which really starts to try to define the way that specifically Black women have a distinct way the misogyny affects them that is different from white women and other women of color. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the phrase intersectionality to speak to the ways that both racism and sexism compounded in the lives of Black women is different and distinct from the ways that racism affects men and the ways that sexism affects white women. And so Black feminism takes all of these things into account and says that there's, again, not just one right way, that we need to honor and give dignity to the ways that all people show up in the world and create space for people to make choices that honor and align with their authentic selves.
All right. Okay. And you mentioned Spelman. Okay. Morehouse.
Okay.
All right. I knew it was something. I was like, come on, man. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Good or bad, how has feminism changed over the years? I mean, I've seen rhetoric on social media that, today's feminism is not what it used to be or how it started, or I've even heard, of course, I've heard this term from men say there's a such thing as toxic femininity. And so do you think in 2022 feminism has taken on a new appearance, a new look? And do you think potentially can it be toxic?
So I think that there are ways that people maybe condense down the concept of feminism to like a very narrow view. This idea that in order to be feminist, you need to be anti-men, for example. But I think that that's a really limited definition. Again, the way that I understand and act in my understanding of Black feminism is really about equity. But there is a way in which people who have historically held power, when that power is threatened or undermined, it can feel like oppression. So when people assert their own autonomy, when women stand up for the things that they need and want and deserve, when that is butted up against the ways that patriarchy and misogyny have typically looked, then sometimes men might feel threatened because it affects their understanding of their own role, of their own power, of their own value. So feminism doesn't seek to take anything away from anyone. It seeks to rebalance in the same ways that I've described. I don't think that that concept has changed over thousands of years. I think that people's interpretation and the ways that people apply it certainly changes as society evolves. We are accustomed to the ways we've been conditioned. And it's not that patriarchy is working by itself. Patriarchy is also working with white supremacy and working with capitalism to continue to keep people disenfranchised. So I think what I see as an evolution is people better understanding the way that these oppressive systems work together to cause us harm, and using that lens to make different decisions. So again, fighting for equal pay and making sure that pay equity is a priority in the workplace. Understanding that it's no less value for people who choose to grow their families, work from home, acknowledging the labor of child rearing as labor, at the same time honoring the people who choose not to parent and choose to prioritize other things in their lives, and seeing those things as equally valuable and honorable. Not that one is pulling women back and the other is pulling women forward. Both of them are important and necessary and good for the people who choose them. So again, to me, it's about more options, more choices, more diversity of thought, not less.
Okay. You know, you mentioned something that kind of stuck out in my head. One, I wanted to ask you, how do you think feminism is portrayed in the media? You know, because growing up, I mean, whenever I would watch a TV show or a movie or something, and a woman has been, characterized as a feminist, it's always associated with she hates men. It was always in the media, especially in the 90s. I remember growing up and watching certain TV shows, and whenever a woman, it was always a certain look of a woman, and typically it would be a woman who, hates men or has a very low opinion of men, and for whatever reason, it was always synonymous with being a feminist. Do you think the media has done a disservice in terms of how people view feminism, or not so much?
I think it depends on the media you consume, but I will say there are ways that all of the art that we take in typically reinforces the conditioning that society wants us to believe in. So because patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy are the foundation, they are the centerpiece of the ways that we have been conditioned in the United States of America. That's what I can speak for because that's where I live. That's certainly reinforced in media. A very narrow, heteronormative point of view that says that men behave this way, women behave this way. These are the ways that are acceptable. And what that does to people who consume that media is makes them question, why does this not feel natural or normal for me? Why is this opposite of the way that I feel about myself? Why does this make me feel bad? So I would encourage folks to consume more media beyond just what film and television give us. There's an incredible academic literature that exists. There's so many books and articles and essays that Black feminist leaders have been putting into the world. And there's also organizations like Feminist Women's Health Center and others that help people to deepen their analysis, to better understand how these systems came to exist, what they are intending to produce, and how we can dismantle them so that we can see a different future for ourselves. I think certainly there are ways that Disney movies and romantic comedies have taught us about the ways that we are supposed to be. But that's not the only way that people are and exist in the world. And so my other hope is that people continue to make really provocative and radical art that will question these systems and the ways that they show up. it's not about defending the word feminism, or it's like, again, like one image of what feminism is or could be. It's about creating more imagination and really sort of busting out of these societal traps around masculinity and femininity that keep us small.
Right. This is, I think that's a great and excellent segue into the next part of this, the juicy part. We're going to talk about dating and relationships and feminism. Because, again, I'm observing these debates and discussions on a regular basis, and it comes up a lot. And you do have a lot of people out there who still feel like, the people who are amongst us in the dating landscape that feel like, well, as a man, it's mandatory you work. A woman working is optional. Things like that. Or, as men, cooking and cleaning, that's a woman's job. Which I've always disagreed with, because I've always, when people say, when they classify certain tasks as man's job and woman's job, they'll say things like cooking. I'm a man, I enjoy cooking. And I've explained to people, if cooking really was a woman's job, there'd be no way as a man I'd be good at it or would feel okay doing it. But I don't see cooking as gender-based. I just cook because I like cooking. And I have a great girlfriend that enjoys my cooking. So I never really looked at it as, this is a woman's job. But I've definitely had people say, that's what women are supposed to do. Women are supposed to stay home and care for the kids, and women have no place in the workforce.
But who taught us that?
Right.
Who decided that? And it's really interesting, particularly thinking about cooking, when you think about the number of female chefs. And so if it's women's work, then why are the majority of professional chefs men?
I'm like, there's a lot. I've had that same argument. I'm cracking up because I'm like, I've said that before. I was like, you got a lot of iron chefs out there who are men. So if it's a woman's work, how are they able to do it so well? But you have the people, and it goes into this, people feel like you're going to, the reason I asked you earlier the difference between black feminism and white feminism, because I've seen women say that the women's suffrage, and I've heard black women say that wasn't our movement. We had no business participating in, that was for white women. The feminist movement, that hurt the black family, it hurt black dating, and that's the reason why we're so messed up now. What would you say to the women, because there are a lot of them, trust me, they are alive and well. What would you say to the women out there who hold these beliefs that the women's suffrage hurt the black family in particular, or they hurt dating and they did a disservice to women?
What I would say is what harmed us is white supremacy. And the ways the white supremacy showed up in first wave and second wave feminism. So women's suffrage, there were black women who were actively involved in the fight for the right to vote. But there were white women who were deeply racist, who said white women should have the right to vote before black men, because they still saw black men as subhuman to whiteness. And so we can't conflate the ways that these systems work. They work together, but they are also working independently at the same time. So the ways that white supremacy infects and informs the way that white people work in these different systems, we still see the remnants of that today. So you take, for example, second wave feminism of like the 60s, 70s, early 80s, again, very much was centered around reproductive rights, access to birth control, the ability for white women who felt trapped by domesticity, in part because they had lost the free labor of black and brown people who had been raising their children, who had been feeding their families. They felt trapped by the patriarchal systems that prevented them from being able to enter the workplace, and felt that the ability to control their reproductive systems was the key to them having some autonomy over their lives. They were not going to be pregnant constantly. They could make choices about their education, about their careers, about what they wanted to do. The difference for many black women was that there was often never a decision between rearing families and working. Black women in this country have always worked, have very frequently worked against their will to raise other people's children, to clean other people's homes, to care for other people's spaces at the same time as they were rearing and caring for children in their own homes. So reproductive rights was not the key issue in many Black households, because they weren't saying that their ability to control their pregnancies was the thing that was going to help them enter the workforce. They were in the workforce. They were also a tool for white women's freedom, because being able to rely again upon Black labor allows for white people to have different choices and options to exert their privilege. So again, if you take a racial lens and complicate something like suffrage and complicate something like second wave feminism and women's liberation, then you get to more equity for more people. When you say that abortion access helps Black people make decisions about how they want to raise their families, and it unlocks something different perhaps in other communities. It's necessary for both, but the outcome is different because the ways that we exist in the world is different. So again, that doesn't speak about dating. I'll go back to dating. But to me, what I want people to think more critically about is, again, this very narrow view of what maybe television, film, what maybe casual conversations have taught them about what feminism might be, and go a little bit deeper into what it actually has been over, again, hundreds of years, thousands of years, ways that people have led uprisings, who have created new systems, who have bucked up against gender norms. The other thing I'll say about dating, though, is there's also a way in which this conversation is very narrowly focused on heterosexual dating. And queer relationships also are a space where we're bucking up against some of these gender norms. This idea that there is a certain way that maleness or femaleness is supposed to show up in a relationship, that's turned on its head if the gender identities of the people in the relationship don't align with that. So that's the other thing, that reproductive justice and intersectional feminism is not just about gender essentialism, that there are only men and there are only women and there are only one way that each of them are supposed to behave. There's fluidity in the ways that gender shows up in the world. And that is reflected in relationships as well.
Dropping all kinds of knowledge. That's what I'm talking about. I'm so digging this. Everybody out there, if you are watching, go ahead and make sure you hit that bell and follow this channel. Receive all the notifications whenever new content is dropped. Make sure you drop some comments down below. Let us know how you feel. And most importantly, I need you to subscribe. If you're watching this on Facebook, make sure you go to the search bar, type in Ringside LLC, and request to join the private Facebook group, and either myself or one of the admins will admit you. I am digging this so far. I really, I'm listening. Well, I'm listening because I'm really picking up on a lot of this, and I agree. I agree fully, because this is a hot button issue when you talk about dating and relationships. You're gonna have, and I'm pretty sure, I'm really curious about your angle to this and how you feel, because you're gonna have some men and women who disagree with feminism because they feel like, based on their interpretation of the Bible, it's not God's way. God says, the woman submits to the man and the man submits to God. And for a lot of people, that is their blueprint. It's not only marriage, but just, dating and life in general. And they feel like, I have most certainly seen loud and proud voices say, well, feminism is against God's way because, God clearly states what the man is supposed to do and what the woman is supposed to do. So, and these are, we're talking Christians. I don't know if some people may refer to it as toxic Christianity, or, everyone has their interpretation of it. But what would you say to the Christians out there? I mean, this is Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Bible Belt. A lot of, religious and Southern values. What would you say to the people out there who feel like feminism is against Christianity and against God's way?
So I think that there are a lot of ways that interpretation of the language of the Bible has been harmful. Not all of it is harmful, but there are certainly ways that man's interpretation of what was written has been used to exert oppression, harm, violence, there are many things that have been interpreted through the language of the Bible that have been used to decimate individuals and societies. So I really hope that people take a lot of care in how they interpret the language of the Bible and think about whether or not it is being used to heal or to harm. There are ways that we can think about relationships. We can think about the ways that love and family and honor and dignity and even submission can be healthy and can be supportive of our relationships. But if it is being used as a weapon to control people's behavior, to admonish people for who they are, who they authentically are, those are the things that I would ask folks to question. And I think, again, one of the most important tenets to me of Black feminism is this idea that your authentic self is right. And in that, if there are people who feel like submitting to their partner in particular ways feels good, feels healthy, feels whole, then nobody is stopping them. I think when we get into trouble is when we decide that our values should be prescribed to everyone. And that's not my belief at all. There's certainly some things that I have and hold dear in my relationship that work for me that might not work for other people. And so I think if we could sort of take a little bit of the posture of, if you like it, I love it, and say, as for me and my household, this is the way we do things, this is what works for us, but I make space for there to be other ways of being. I mean, I think that would free us up. Like, we don't actually have to be in each other's business quite this hard. And if you you encounter someone in a dating relationship that doesn't subscribe to the value sets that you think are important, then that's not the right person for you to date. And there's another person who will. I just think that will free us up from some of the conflict that we find ourselves in, is when we dig in to say that my way is the only way. I think that's what really limits us from being more free.
No, I agree. We having all kind of church here today because I'm really agreeing with that because, number one, I've always said there's more than one way to get to the mall. I don't say there's more than one way to skin a cat because that's just gross. I just say, look, there's more than one way to get to the mall. But you are going to have, it irritates my soul sometimes if we can all acknowledge that even we're just talking about Black people, we're not monolithic. Many of us come from different backgrounds, raised in different beliefs, different values, upbringings, the whole nine. But people feel like, nonetheless, we all should be living off one marital paradigm. And I'm like, that's just so ridiculous. What works for you won't work for someone else. And then you are going to have the people who feel like, they can acknowledge that there's a difference, but then they're gonna place a superiority. Well, this way is the best way.
Right.
This way is how a marriage will work. The other way, your marriage is doomed or it won't work.
Even if we look at all of the different kinds of relationships that are depicted in the stories of the Bible, they're not all one way. Mm-hmm. Every marriage in the Bible is not one way. The ways that those individual people, the stories of their lives, show a lot of different variety in how relationships can and should look. So where we got this sort of very narrow prescription of this is the role of the man, I don't know if it's just from one book, if it's just from one chapter, but if we take it in its totality, it also depicts that there are multiple right ways of being.
Last question, and for the men out there watching this who want to be allies, how can a man who supports you and supports the work, how can we as men, what can we do to show allyship? And if you had a man to say, look, I want to be an ally, I want to be an asset, what can I do? Or what are some behaviors I can start implementing today, and maybe some mindsets I can scrap?
I think being able to listen to Black women. I think taking the time to do study. So, certainly there are many, like I said, books, essays, articles, journals that are dedicated to sort of thinking about expansive Black feminist thought, womanism, of queer praxis. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can sort of deepen our understanding and analysis of the ways that the world works. So I would encourage that. There's so many places online where these conversations are happening, where there is healthy and constructive dialogue, as opposed to sort of inviting the opportunity to talk down and talk over one another. I think having conversations with the women and girls and queer and gender non-conforming folks in your life, so they can talk about what ways patriarchy and misogyny have been harmful to them, what ways that they have felt subjugated, what ways they felt diminished, and what they need to feel whole and well and cared for and defended. I think taking opportunities to have conversations when some of these limiting beliefs show up in male friendships, to start to not admonish, not like shake your finger at people, but to ask questions and really start to dig into, like, where did that come from for you? Where did you learn that? Was that because you saw it modeled for you in your household? Was it because you saw it on TV? Was it because, your favorite rapper said that this is the way that you need to be a man? And just starting to ask some of those questions about, like, where did it come from? Who does it harm? Who does it help? So I think that having these dialogues is not a bad thing if we go into it with the openness of, like, I'm not here to fight, I'm here to learn, I'm here to listen, I'm here to get a different experience from somebody who has a different life than me, who's someone who's seen different things than I have, who's read different stuff than I have, and I'm open to learning new information and having my mind changed. My mind has changed 1,000 times over my life, When I get new information, I make new decisions. That's the way we evolve, that's the way we grow. So being, like, hungry and curious for new ways of thinking, new ways of being, and not thinking that just because you have been conditioned to believe one thing, that there's not other things that could be true.
Evolution is definitely the word. I'm definitely feeling that. Kwajelyn Jackson, thank you so much. Before we cut out of here, if someone wanted to find the Feminist Women's Health Center or find you, social media, whatever, how can people follow you?
So Feminist Women's Health Center is feministcenter.org. It's our website, again, for our clinical health services, for our activism and organizing work. We're also on Instagram at Feminist Center, on Twitter at FWHC. We're on TikTok too, but I don't know the handle because I don't really do TikTok like that.
Me neither.
I am also on social media. I am super qua on everything. I'm not that interesting to follow, but I'm out here. So SUPERKWA on all the platforms except for Facebook. I quit Facebook.
Good. That was smart.
Ain't nothing on there for me.
I look forward to that. I can quit Facebook.
But yeah, and so there are lots of other, again, feminist organizations, reproductive justice organizations that I could recommend. Lots of books and resources, so happy to share that with your audience as well.
Indeed. Thank you so much, and everybody out there. We'll put the links in the description, so you can just click on it and take you right there. Again, this has been a powerful, epic Ringside Corner Confessions. Thank you again, and everybody out there, remember to follow, drop some comments, and most importantly, subscribe. Thank you so much, and we will catch you guys again.